Okay.
Hey, good evening, everyone. It's me and George here. Just a late night for me. I guess it's getting late, somewhat late for George here. But we're just having a quick chat, just discussing some of the research we've been doing over the past week. Um, I think there's lots that's been going on in the news. Just a quick, I guess, just a headline breakdown. If people haven't seen this, there's yet another scandal in the news with the Catholic Church, and it's coming out of Michigan. This was 5 days ago. This was reported. This was May 23rd, 2019. But the headline is five Michigan Catholic priests are facing sexual abuse charges. And few of the bishops are facing life imprisonment. For example, right, where was this here? Patrick Casey, the Archdiocese of Detroit, was charged in Wayne County with one felony count of CSC3, child sex abuse. I guess that's a code for that. Maximum sentence of 15 years in prison for him. Um, yeah, right here, Vincent DiLorenzo, 80. He was from the Lansing Diocese. He was charged in Genesee County with three felony counts and a maximum sentence of life in prison. And the other names of these Catholic priests are Timothy Michael Crowley from the Lansing Diocese. He is facing maximum 15 years in prison. Neil Kalina from the Archdiocese of Detroit is facing maximum 15 years in prison. Um, and then here, Jacob Violin, it says he's also facing a maximum sentence in prison. So yeah, so it looks like some of these allegations, are serious. If because usually like, the civil authorities, have notoriously been lenient, with the Catholic priests. Most of the time because like the Catholic influence within like the Attorney General's departments and within the police force. But I think it's intriguing that I think the evidence must be overwhelming in this Michigan case if they're asking for like life imprisonment for some of these Catholic priests because Cardinal Pell only got 6 years with his recent conviction over in Australia. And is that if there was a Catholic priest, given life in prison, that would be like an unprecedented case. So that's just interesting news out of Michigan that just popped up this week that I wanted to bring up. But George, I know you had a bunch of stuff you wanted to talk about today, George. So if you want to get into some of that, go ahead.
Well, I told you what was in my hopper. Before I do that, I need to address something, and perhaps we can talk about it on Friday, assuming Johnny is able to join us. A couple of days ago in Virginia Beach, Virginia, there was a shooting where there was a disgruntled employee, a municipal employee for the city of Virginia Beach, who went to work and killed at least a dozen of his coworkers. And this seemed anytime you have an incident where you have any type of mass shooting in which you have at least double digit fatalities or injuries, I'm automatically suspicious. And sure enough, I believe Hawkeye sent out some stuff. He said he has some information on the chief of police and on the mayor. I don't recall their names, right? But the chief of police went to St. Leo's College for his undergrad degree in Florida, and the mayor of Virginia Beach got his undergrad degree from University of St. Louis, and so they had their
Yeah, I'll
bases.
I'll pull up your great. Yeah, I'll pull up those names here. Yeah, the mayor was. Let me see here. Police chief was James Surveya. James Surveya, police chief. We have St. Leo University, but his name is James Surveya, and the mayor was Robert Bobby Dwyer, educated by the Jesuits at St. Louis. And just to add, George, I guess with the Jesuit trifecta, the governor of the state at that time, Tim Kaine, was trained by the Jesuits and did a volunteer corps with the Jesuits.
Well, actually, Tim Kaine left office in Virginia in 2000 as governor. He's now the one of the senators for Virginia. And back in 2016, he was Hillary's running mate for vice president. I don't recall I had to go look this up, who the current governor is. But McAuliffe, I think, he got in some flack because back in the 80s, he was dressed in blackface for like a high school yearbook or something like that. And there's all sorts of, he was placed under all sorts of pressure to resign, but he didn't. So, anyhow, as I said, I just wanted to mention this in passing because I had other topics to discuss. So, of course, they're going to use this, what happened a couple of days ago, or what didn't happen, or whatever happened, as a pretext for more gun confiscation in Virginia and in other states in America, because that's how it works. Now, this is different from something that's gone on recently. There was never any question of race or racism. The alleged killer wasn't, as far as I know, he was not supposed to be a white nationalist or white supremacist or anything along those lines. However, that's okay, just so long as there are guns involved, and they can use this as a justification for more grabbing, gun grabbing. Something I wanted to mention is I told
Oh,
you
just,
this
just really quickly, George, just on the gun grabbing. I'll link this website. I think this website's still up, but there's a good website out there. I think this Thomas Richards from spirituallysmart.com runs the site, but it's called VaticanGunControl.com. Yeah, I'll link it in the chat here. But this guy just links a bunch of relevant news stories that deal with disarmament and Catholic. Like tons of stories of Catholic. I read on this website the Jesuit priest Greg Boyle immediately after Sandy Hook was calling for gun control, for instance. Tons of good information on this website. There's a nativity scene in a Catholic church in Connecticut with a list of all the previous false flag shootings that have taken place in the United States since the 1990s. And like the nativity scene is about praying for disarmament, praying for like a solution to that. But it's just I'll link that website. It's just a great website for source material. VaticanGunControl.com.
Okay, I know we had to do a relatively short show tonight because I had to get up relatively early tomorrow. So I mentioned this to you. I mentioned this to you, Eric, before we went live about what I'd like to talk about, and I was joking and saying, I really probably don't need to prepare any more material or original material because we can just simply do shows where I respond to your videos. And for my first couple of points, that's basically going to be the case. You did a video a couple weeks ago on Neo / Thomas Anderson, Keanu Reeves' character from the Matrix series, and you basically were positing the idea that Neo may have been controlled opposition, and he may have been in fact a Jesuit because he dressed in all black, and at least one of the films. Well, it's interesting that you should say that because I didn't know much about Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves, the man. Turns out that he got his undergrad degree from, he went to, here we go. He went to LaSalle College in Toronto, and he has an interesting background, I think. His mom is Chinese and Hawaiian, but his dad is English. He was born in Beirut, Lebanon. And I'm not sure how he got to travel so much. So Reeves was born in 1964, and he has had now. Granted, he went to a Catholic school, not necessarily not Jesuit, but he's been one of the city's working actors for the last 30 plus years. Before he did the Matrix franchise, he played Ted in Bill and Ted's Adventure, in which he played he and his buddy Bill were a couple of stoner dudes who had all these who got to go back in time and have all these Wonderful Adventures. Then in the 1990s, he did Point Break, a film with Patrick Swayze, where Reeves played an FBI agent. And he did other films. He did this Speed series and things like that. So he's been busy, um, and he's definitely served the Vatican agenda. And in addition to the, in addition to
Well, just
making,
recently, just quickly on Reeves, I saw a movie that I think kind of depicts like the Jesuit dystopian, uh, like or the Jesuit, yeah, the Jesuit vision of our utopian society that Keanu Reeves was in that I saw recently was a Scanner Darkly, the Philip K. Dick book that was made into a movie, but the movie is about like a kind of like a future dystopian police state where the whole society is like heavily surveillanced, where the majority of the population is addicted to this drug called substance D, but it turns out that the government makes the drugs, gets the people addicted to the drugs, and then enforces the drugs via police state measures. Very much how our current society operates. Like Keanu Reeves was, I think he was like the star actor in that movie. I just wanted to mention that recently. I saw that movie. I just wanted to mention that.
okay, what is it called?
It's called A Scanner Darkly, and a website I use is putlocker.org. It's a website you can watch free movies on. But yeah, I recommend you watch that, George. I think you would enjoy it. There's lots of analogies just for our current way society's going.
Well, he currently he's for the last several years he's been involved. Reeves has been involved with the John Wick franchise, and without giving it away, the producer of John Wick is Derek Kolstad, who was born in 1974 in Wisconsin, and he went to Sacred Heart High School in I guess in Pasadena, California. So, and as I said, those who aren't familiar with the John Wick series, I've only seen one. But Reeves' character, John Wick, is an assassin. He's basically a human killing machine who works
A
for the
Vatican
table.
assassin?
I'm sorry?
Was a Vatican assassin?
Well, well, that's, well, perhaps. Well, he works for some sort of nebulous organization called the Table. And the table has almost divine type power. They have power of life and death. And there's actually a scene in one of the movies where he's talking to one of his where Wick is talking to one of his superiors, and she says, "You need to atone for your sins." And so this is how you're going to make you're going to make atonement, or how you're this is how you're going to do your this is what you need to do for your penance. So
Well,
it's
there you go. That's very penance is like actually I was reading a I'll link this book. I was reading Peter J. Doiswick has like a 70 page like his chapter on penance in his third volume on his book on dogma is like 70 pages. Penance is like a very Catholic concept, like deeply
yeah.
rooted in Catholic dogma.
However, this is supposed to be a secular movie, and these are supposed to be secular characters, and so
Well, actually, no, I was maybe yeah, I'll see if I can pull this up in the email. I think Hawkeye or Philippe sent this on an email. On the recent Avengers movie, I think the character. Oh, what was the character? Just one of the characters had like a Catholic amulet as one of his as his shield. It was like an amulet from like a 13th century Catholic saint. Let's see if I
oh,
can pull that up here. Yeah, it was like super. It was as I thought, well, like Jesuit theater, but you come to expect stuff like that. But I'll pull up that example from the superhero movie.
okay. Well, something I forgot to mention. One of the films that Reeves did in the early 1990s was Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is arguably of all the Dracula films, it's supposed to be the one that's most faithful to the original novel. Whether that's the case, that's a different subject altogether. However, are you familiar with the Dracula movies or the book or anything like that?
Vaguely, I didn't watch the movies or the like or read the books, but like I'm vaguely familiar with the concept. The vampire from
Okay.
Transylvania, the
Well, as
basic.
I said, the movie that came out in 1982, as I said, is called Bram Stoker's Dracula. Bram Stoker was actually an Irish English writer in the late 19th century, early 20th century, who was best known for that work. He wasn't really noted as a writer like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or something like that, but he is known as like a stage manager. And well, one of the characters in the novel and the subsequent films is Abraham Van Helsing, Dr. Abraham Van Helsing, who, as I said, he's a fictitious character. So he would have been born sometime in the 19th century and probably died in the early 20th century. Um, However, Van Helsing is quite the polyglot. He knows a whole bunch of languages: Latin, French, German, Dutch, obviously, because his character is Dutch, English, and he knows almost about everything. He's an expert on almost every subject imaginable, besides killing vampires. And of course, his character is a devout Roman Catholic. Now, it's interesting. Stroker was a member of the Church of Ireland, which is the Irish communion of the Church of England. And so I know this sounds almost like a cliche. So I always got the impression, now, as I said, Van Helsing was not a real character, but I always got the impression that he was a Jesuit.
You know, the way you're sounding, I mean, he sounds like an elegant, wise, like intellectual, like a sorcerer. People aren't aware
Well,
that,
okay.
in terms of, in terms of a cult, like Helena Blavatsky is one of the more most respected authors in the field of occultism, and she labeled the
Mhm.
Jesuits like the biggest black magicians on the earth.
No, well,
A
as I
lot of
said,
people aren't aware of it.
Van Helsing, as I said, he was a fictitious character. However, that reminds me, oftentimes writers will base fictitious characters on real people. For example, I just mentioned Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was trained by the Jesuits and a Freemason. He based his character Sherlock Holmes on one of his professors. Ian Fleming, the author of the James Bond series, basic character James Bond 007, he was basically a composite of um, uh, several men whom he knew in real life. So I'm sure Van Helsing probably has some basis in reality.
Well, I agree. Well, all of their movies, they sprinkle truth into them. Like I've noticed that
And
throughout
so,
their the movie 7 Days in May. Like they did a movie about like the Smedley Butler 1934 business plot. That movie was done in like 1960. But like if you were aware of like the history of the plot in 1934, you would know that this movie 7 Days in May like wasn't really all fictitious at all. Like they were kind of glamorizing that plot.
uh, well, anyhow, now, as I said, I was joking earlier about just doing a response video to your videos. When you did your video on General Thomas Power, you made a reference to Oscar Schindler, the character who was the eponymous character, or who was the character in the movie Schindler's List, played by our Roman Catholic Liam Neeson, Jesuitically trained Liam Neeson. Well, one of the other characters in the movie, I forgot his name, was Ben Kingsley, and Kingsley was a Jewish businessman who befriended Schindler. And you said that Oscar Schindler was a knight of the Order of Saint Sylvester. Now, Schindler's List was a complete. You're talking earlier about controlled opposition, or we're discussing that before we went live. So the movie Schindler's List came out in 1993. It starred Liam Neeson, as we said, is Roman Catholic. He was trained in the Jesuits. It was directed by Steven Spielberg, who's Jewish. But Spielberg has received at least two knighthoods. I believe he's the order. He's
Well, I know he's
huh?
the British knighted him.
Yes. So, which is since he's an American citizen, is only honorary. He also has an Italian knighthood. The film also starred Ralph Fiennes, who was Irish Roman Catholic, and I guess the fourth or the third star of the film was Ben Kingsley, who is of an Indian background, I believe Indian background or Sri Lanka or some Central Asian background. Well, his fourth wife, Daniela Lamberger, went to the Pontifical Catholic University in Brazil. Uh, so that's his fourth and current wife. So basically, your three main actors in the film has some sort of a tenuous nexus with Rome. Well, it wasn't so tenuous. It's really solid. So that is just what I would like to present with you on Ben Kingsley. Now, since at least the
The whole
1980s,
film, like they're saying, the film itself was a Catholic whitewash. They didn't talk about how Hitler learned his anti-Semitism from an Austrian Catholic priest, Karl Lueger. They didn't talk about Hitler was born into a Catholic family and remained Catholic his whole life. You know, Himmler was Catholic. His chief geopolitical advisor, Karl Haushofer, was a devout Roman Catholic. Martin Bormann was Catholic. Mengele was Catholic. Like the list goes on and on. Klaus Barbie was Catholic. Um, it goes on and on and on. But like the movie was to gatekeep that the
okay,
Nazism itself was a Vatican creation.
okay, well,
Like
just
people, just a key statistic or fact that the movie doesn't bring up. Obviously, like the gatekeepers don't bring this up, but Nazism originated in the most Catholic part of Europe, that being Bavaria. If people aren't aware of that.
oh yes. So actually, when we do the show on Friday, I'd like to talk about the history of anti-Semitism and formal anti-Semitism or intellectual anti-Semitism, and the rise of the Nazi Party. And I'd just like to address it. I would like to address that then. Now, speaking of gatekeeping, I came across his name a while back. I read one of his books, and I've seen a number of references to him in other books. Speaking of Steven Spielberg, Spielberg has been one of the big names in Hollywood since the 1970s, and one of his big World War II drama was Saving Private Ryan, which came out in 1998. Well, the fellow who wrote the screenplay for that was Stephen Ambrose. Later, he also wrote the screenplay for the HBO series Band of Brothers. So Ambrose has done a number of works. He wrote a book on Douglas MacArthur, Doug, Dwight David Eisenhower, Harry Truman, FDR. So you want to talk about gatekeepers? He received the University of St. Louis Literary Prize, I guess, in the early 1990s. So they're saying it's not quite as impressive as the Lord of the Sword of Loyola, but it's close enough. So they're basically saying the machine saying, "Good job, Steve." Um, so Ambrose, as I said, in addition to being a historian writing all this book, he was a professor at the University of New Orleans in Louisiana, which is a secular institution. And there's another, clear-cut case of gatekeeping. So, how many of these historians have there been? Secular historians who are writing about events like generals like Douglas MacArthur or World War II or whatever the case may be, who somehow been manufactured or controlled by Rome. I mean, in addition to Ambrose, you have, I've mentioned him before, you had Barbara Tuchman, who is best known for the Guns of August. She too also received a, or she also received uh, the same prize for the University of St. Louis.
No, like it's it's really endless, to be honest.
And so, anyhow, the
Just like this, I don't know if you saw this. I thought it was interesting. Dan Rather, the prominent CBS anchor.
yeah, he took over for 1981. He took over for Walter Cronkite of
Yeah,
CBS Evening News.
the Cronkite. Yeah, and that was like the prime time spot at that point. But I just rather like he was attending the Knights of Columbus conventions and stuff like that. I don't think he
Mhm.
was like a Catholic, but like I just saw like when George H.W. Bush spoke at the Knights of Columbus convention in 1992, Dan Rather was in attendance at the Knights of Columbus Hall, which I just thought was a little strange. But
Well,
their control is
well, he
pretty
also
expensive.
Well, he also made rather a young man rather made a name for himself on November the 22nd, 1963, when he covered the JFK assassination. And you know how
There
we
you
talked
go.
about Mika Brzezinski.
Sorry, George. Sorry, finish your thought.
You know how we were talking about Mika Brzezinski, how she was the first or one of the first reporters to talk about 9/11. We talked about John Daly, who was the feature host, the original host of What's My Line, how he covered several major events during World War II, such as announcing the bombing of Pearl Harbor for CBS Radio and the death of FDR. And they seem to have their puppets at the right place at the right time to cover these events to spin them.
Oh, like
Now, as I
I
said,
was
rather,
watching just an example of that. I was listening to when I went on my road trip, and I'll link some of I've scanned or I've uploaded some of the books I got from my road trip down to Pennsylvania to get the Peter J. Doiswick books and some converted Catholic magazine articles. But I was listening to some of the show Johnny did on the the Boston Globe Spotlight case, and just some of the case was like in itself, like they went after like Gagin, who was already it was already like a finished case. Like the Gagin case was like really done in 1999, and the Globe waited like 4 or 5 years to write about it. And it was kind of like since like it was they kind of gaslighted the situation, like they didn't go in as much depth nearly as they could have. But like the chief reporter in that Globe investigation, Walter Robinson, was educated by the Jesuits at Boston College High School, and they even made like a Jesuit theater movie on the whole case recently. Like they were kind of blowing up how like righteous, I mean, how good the reporters were at the Globe. But like people need to realize, like the head reporter at the Boston Globe, Walter Robinson, was trained by the Jesuits, which
well,
not a coincidence.
funny you should talk about somebody who's educated, went to high school um, in the Boston, Mass area, because that's a good segue to my next point. Um, I'm not sure how many wars and civil wars there have been in the last 100 years, well, since World War II, 70 plus years. And however, something I'd just like to discuss was just one of them I'd like to discuss would be the um, Liberian Civil War or Civil Wars. The first one taking place from 1989 to 97 and from 1999 to 2003. The um, Liberia is in West Africa. It has a population of about 5 million people, and it's roughly 85% Christian of some sort, Catholic, Protestant. However, the last 30 years, they've been absolutely they've been ripped apart by strife, unnecessary strife. And it came about in the 1920s supposed to be a haven for repatriated slaves for America. There are many Americans, and mostly Protestant Americans, who said, you know what, slavery is wrong, and therefore, yes, we should end it. And whether you agree with this is another conversation altogether. We should send them back to their own country. And we should, or send them back to their own continent. And we should create a whole new country for them that would be their own, and we can help them. We can set up their government, their infrastructure, so they can have businesses and support themselves. And for about 140, 150 years, things were okay in Liberia. They had a fairly stable country, a safe one. They had some crime. But then you had, I guess, for want of a better expression, the judges said, you know what, we can't have that. Therefore, we should destroy Liberia. And this is not speculation, because I looked up who have the ambassadors been to Liberia the last 30 years, or since the 1980s. One, and I mentioned him before when talking about Somalia, was James Kehoe Bishop. Bishop was there from 1987 to 1990. So basically the beginning of the Civil War. And just as a reminder, Kehoe went to Boston College, and he's a devout Roman Catholic. This says that here on his Wikipedia page. He has 6 children. Another ambassador.
It's just that's Kehoe Bishop. Bishop was the last name.
Yes, James Kehoe Bishop, who was born in 1936. He was the ambassador to Liberia from 1987 to 1990, so just before the Civil War, and just as it began. Another one has been Donald Booth. He was
he's the current envoy to Sudan, I think. Jesuit trained at Georgetown. But he was a Liberia ambassador or envoy before.
Yes. Now he was there from 2005 to 2008, so just after the Second Civil War. And yes, as you said, he was at Georgetown. Also, somebody else who was the ambassador there was John W. Blaney. Blaney was born in 1948, and he was the ambassador from Liberia to 2002 to 2005. So just at the end of the Second Civil War. Now, to top it off, now you're talking about this editor for the Boston Globe, Robinson. You said that he went to Holy Cross, or you said he went to, was it Holy Cross High School or Boston College High School?
Yeah, it was Boston College High School.
Okay. Well, Charles Taylor was a strong man who led Liberia from 1997 to 2003. He was born in 1948. Taylor went to Newman Prep School in Boston, named after John Henry Cardinal Newman.
Oh wow, great information.
So you have this thug who was trained essentially by the Jesuits, Taylor.
Was this leading? Like what? I'm just not like adept with the current Liberian situation. Is there like a communist faction that's involved with this versus like a non-communist faction?
You know what? I don't bother. I don't mean to sound jaundiced. I don't bother looking at the details, like who the belligerents are, which party is fighting against whom, or which tribe is fighting against whom, because in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. Just so long as people are fighting and dying, that's all, and the country is ruined. I don't mean to sound, bad. I feel bad for people living in Liberia or Somalia or wherever, but as far as the Jesuits are concerned, it doesn't matter who's fighting whom. It doesn't matter, here in America. Whether it's the North fighting the South, whether it's the Hutus fighting the Tutus.
In the Rwanda, which is crazy, like the Hutus and the Tutsis like were predominantly Catholic. Like I want to say like 85% of both of them were Catholic. Like the Tutsis, like they originate from Belgium, like from the Belgian when the Belgians colonized Rwanda. Like that came with Catholicism, obviously. But it shows that like they got millions of Catholics or hundreds of thousands of Catholics to kill other Catholics, like unhesitatingly. What was the name of this Liberian leader? And so was this the leader of coming into the first Civil War?
Okay, Taylor was in the Second Civil War. Charles Taylor.
It was Charles Taylor. I'll link that in the Wikipedia in the chat.
So generally speaking, if you need a thug, send it to a Jesuit school, or a Catholic, at least a Catholic school, preferably Jesuit. And because I mean, the list, this is beginning.
Well, actually, George, speaking of that, if you want to be like a mass murdering cult leader in Africa, it's good to go to a Jesuit school. And I know that sounds crazy, but I'll verify what I just said there. Give me a second. I'm just posting Charles Taylor. And just the Charles Taylor, the leader of Wikipedia, you said he went to Cardinal Newman School in America?
Yes.
Catholic school? Okay. But this guy here, this guy I brought up, Joseph. I'll link this guy in the description too. Joseph Kibweteri. This is nearby in Uganda. But this guy actually, this guy set up this was literally like Jonestown 2.0, George. But in Uganda, this Joseph Kibweteri, he was one of the leaders of the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God, which was a group that splintered from the Roman Catholic Church in Uganda. I'm reading off the Wikipedia here. But it became infamous after 778 of its members were found dead. And they died in it was the official story was it was an explosion. But it turned out that the cult leader here, Joseph Kibweteri, was a Roman Catholic priest in the Los Angeles Archdiocese who actually got a scholarship to go to Jesuit Loyola Marymount University. And he got a scholarship from the Jesuit school, and then he went over to Uganda, murdered a bunch of his cult members, and then he's still alive. It was announced in 2014 that the Uganda National Police was hiding, the Uganda National Police announced that Kibweteri was hiding in Malawi. But that's just a crazy story because this Joseph Kibweteri guy was connected to the Jesuits at Loyola Marymount before this crazy incident happened with the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. Just kind of crazy stuff.
Okay, I'll have to go look into that. So it's just like they keep playing the same card over and over again. They'll do variations of it. You mentioned Jim Jones, and there was back in the 1990s, there was a Japanese cult called Om, I think, or Otom, I think. They I'm just going off of memory here. They decided to gas the Tokyo subway with sarin, and because that's what their leader told them to do. I'll have to go look into that. But there's supposed to be, and I wish I remember the name of them, but they're basically supposed to be a suicide terrorist cult. And I'm sure that has something to do with Rome. And I'll probably
absolutely. Well, if I wanted to mention this with the Rwandan genocide, I have to look into this more. But there was supposedly a Hutu manifesto that was written right before the genocide, and I bet it was ghostwritten by Jesuits or Catholic priests. But a lot of manifestos for these movements come from Rome. At the end of the day.
Okay. Well, yes, we've discussed
the Communist Manifesto, for instance.
Well, whether you're talking about the Communist Manifesto or Mein Kampf or the protocols of the learned elders of Zion.
Yeah, and they give it away in the Elders of Zion. Like they can read in the Elders of Zion. It says that like, oh, the only body that we respect as an enemy is the Jesuits. Like they even say that in the Elders of Zion. They say that we respect the Jesuits, while like they're saying the Jews are plotting this all-powerful conspiracy. And actually, Leo Lehman and I've seen this. There's two sources: Leo H. Lehman in Behind the Dictators, and Count Paul Heusbrook in his book 14 Years a Jesuit. But when the Jesuits got into their Janus strife back in the 17th century, they forged a document called the Protocols of the Elders of Bourg. The Elders of the Bourg Fontaine, which was which is basically the first. It was like the Protocols of Elders design was like a model off this fabrication, and they fabricated this document, the Protocols of the Elders of Bourg Fontaine, to depict like an all-pervasive Janist conspiracy that was like kind of like trying to take over like the life of like Europe, and they did the exact same thing with the Jews. But it's interesting that they played that card with the Janists, in like the 17th century.
Oh,
And actually, in Mein Kampf, on page 7 or 8, Hitler talks about how the ideal totalitarian state is the power that like a bishop like exhibits over like his underling, like in the church. J.J. Murphy, I'll link that in the chat. But J.J. Murphy, in his article titled "How the Catholic Church Helped Hitler to Power," quotes some Mein Kampf quotes from Hitler. And Hitler talked about how like the Catholic Church's system is like the ideal totalitarian model.
well,
And like you mentioned, like the author of Mein Kampf, from a bunch of sources, it's claimed was Bernard Stampfel, who I believe was a Jesuit, was he not? I know he was a Catholic priest.
Yes, he was. Now he was supposed to have died in the 1930s in a concentration camp. So maybe his handlers decided to throw him under the Greyhound and say, you know what, you know, we don't want it to get out that he actually wrote Mein Kampf. So they thought they would, basically burn him to, cover their tracks.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's partly why they killed Joseph Tiso in Nuremberg, the Roman Catholic priest who, like a Roman Catholic priest, people aren't aware of, the president. There was a Roman Catholic priest who was in charge of Slovakia, and he created a literal like fascist police state. Like he bragged that he killed more Jews than Hitler, for instance. He bragged that he was better at dealing with the Jews than Hitler. But Joseph Tiso, I think they killed Joseph Tiso to hush up the fact that like there was a Catholic priest who was in charge of such a tyrannical, like disgusting state that Slovakia was at that time. Because I think it would have concerned millions if millions of Americans were aware that a Roman Catholic priest was capable of such horror as Joseph Tiso's regime in Slovakia. I think it would have been bad for public relations.
Well,
So I think they had to hush up the fact just that Tiso is such a monster.
well, and just to talk about just to get back to the civil wars in Liberia, this is something that was completely uh, ignored in the West. You might see like a back page story of the Washington Post or the New York Times, but it was almost never talked about, and which is partially people's attitude. Well, that's over in Africa. That's not here. That doesn't affect us. Well, the first Civil War, the body count was something like at least 250,000 people in a 4-year period. The death toll in the Second War was at least 150,000 to 300,000. So you're talking combined over 500,000 people in these two wars. And as I said, Liberia only has a population of less than 5 million people. So that's roughly 10% of the population. And this is something people don't appreciate about war, about an eternal war, like a civil one, is how much damage it does, not just to the people in terms of say those are died, those are wounded, those are displaced, but what it does to your infrastructure, to your transportation, to your sewer, to your water, to your power grid. And Liberia is a poor country. It's not that they have the wherewithal just to bounce back just like that. So, one of the
Well,
problems
it's devastating, and people like it just wait for people to realize that when you're driving down the highway and you just or just on every street, you see the intricate lay of power lines, it's an extensive. Like think about like there's probably like 1 million miles of power lines in America, for instance. And it keeps everything up and running. But yeah, when there's constant war and strife, like it destroys these networks, and then you're basically at ground zero. Sanitary conditions go down. I'm sure a lot of people in Liberia don't have internet connection. I don't know the specific stat.
And it's not just Liberia. It's Somalia, it's Sudan, it's Eritrea, it's Ethiopia, it's Yemen. It's like the list goes on and on and on. Uganda, Mozambique. You have all these countries where you have hundreds of thousands, millions of people killed, and just as many who are suffering. And as I said, generally speaking, these countries are poor to begin with. Although Liberia prior to Civil War was doing decently economically. It probably had the second or third standard of living in Africa prior to the first Civil War. It wasn't like the United States or Canada or anything like that, but the life was okay there. But it's now it gone from being a second world country to basically like a third or fourth world country. And when you suffer these massive blows, it's difficult, if not impossible, to bounce back from that. It's just like it takes years, decades to rebuild,
Well,
unless you have.
Guatemala, like is an example of like a country where there's been like brutal dictator after brutal dictator. Since like the 1900s. Like in particular, like when the U.S. Intervened in 1950, they put Armaz in power, and Armaz, he was only in power for like 6 or 7 years, but there was like 4 or 5 successive brutal dictators, just one after another, like just unspeakable like horror, done to the people of Guatemala. Oh, is George you there? Oh, I think George. Oh, hello.
Yes, I'm sorry. I accidentally dropped the link, or
Oh, yeah, no
sorry
worries.
about that.
Well, like I'm thinking of another brutal dictatorship of somewhat recent time was the Jorge Videla dictatorship in Argentina. He was a devout Roman Catholic. You'd figure being from Argentina. Like Argentina actually had like a law where you had to be Roman Catholic to be president. I don't know if that's still in place, but I know that was in place like as up to like 1965. You had to be a Roman Catholic to be president of Argentina. But Jorge Videla, his police state, I want to say murdered at least 50,000. That's probably a low number, at least. Um, like hundreds of thousands of people disappeared in his regime. But there's Pope Francis like was blessing him.
Oh yes, well
While he was murdering. There's a photo of him giving Videla like a wafer on the internet, for instance.
well there's funny during the Argentinian Dirty War, 1976 to 83. Um, there's so many different components to that story. Well, Jorge Bergoglio, now Pope Francis, was, as I mentioned this to you before, Argentina was ruled by the two Jorges, Bergoglio and Vidalia, Generalissimo Vidalia. And Vidalia was the secular power, and Bergoglio was the spiritual power. So Jorge Bergoglio was the
Or was it
spiritual coadjutor.
just like Stepniak and Pavlich identically from 1940?
Yes. Yeah, as I said, Argentina, they did after they had the coup, they overthrew Vidalia, and he went to spend the rest of his life in prison. And even though he was a murderer, and I guess fortunately for Vidalia, they don't have capital punishment in Argentina. Um, and Vidalia, as I said, died back in 2010, I believe. Whereas Bergoglio, the current France, he didn't spend a day in jail. He didn't pay $1 and fine or whatever currency they use in Argentina. They so he got off scot free, and this is long before he became the pontiff. And so if
Or
you're
say,
one of the
like, was he?
survivors,
I know, like at that time he was a Jesuit, but like, was he the provincial, like the head Argentina
yeah.
provincial?
Now I'm not sure how many people have looked into Bergoglio's life, but he was like you could say he was like the Alexander Haig and the Douglas MacArthur in terms of say Catholic churchman. He flew through the ranks. I mean, he made bishop, I think, when he was 40 or something. I mean, just like it usually takes. Uh, okay, not to bore people with the inner workings of the Catholic hierarchy, but basically, you have to be a priest. You become a priest, or usually a temporary deacon, then a priest. Then you might, if you're fortunate, become an auxiliary bishop, a backup one. Then, if you're a little more, I don't want to say lucky, well, cursed, you become a bishop. Then you might become an archbishop. But generally speaking, bishop or auxiliary bishop is like the pinnacle of your career. Um, but and this usually you're talking about decades, 20, 30 years to obtain these positions. Well, Bergoglio made bishop within like less than 10 years after his ordination. He had somebody fast tracking his career. Um, so, and that's besides the point.
Like
But when you have these,
the hidden hand. Like there's that photo of him with his hand in the coat. Like I'm sure you've seen that photo, right? Where Bergoglio's doing the hidden hand.
around the metro, and I guess in Buenos Aires, and he has like the Masonic hand gesture.
Yeah, and I think like this, I think I think the G in Masonry is Jesu from the Jesu is the headquarter church of the Jesuits in Rome. There's Jesu churches also all over the United States. I know there's a Jesu church in Miami. I think there's a Jesu church in Milwaukee. There's probably one on the West Coast for sure. But
Yes.
like I have this guy's autobiography. This was written by a Jesuit, but actually, let me give me a second here. I'll show you the picture, George. But I have a picture of the Jesuit Francis Matthews, who was the first. He was known as like the apostolic, or like the first like quote like the unofficial apostolic delegate to Washington in like the 1800s. He was related to the first mayor of Washington, Robert Brent, the devout Catholic Mayor Brent. And Matthews was also related to John Carroll as like a distant cousins. But this Roman Catholic priest Matthews, he was ordained a Jesuit. He was, for instance, he set up the first public school system in Washington. Was set up by a Catholic priest. But in the photo of this biography I have on him, he's doing the hidden hand in his coat, Master Mason pose, and he's a Jesuit. And I think it's just more in like just Francis Matthews also set up the Washington Public Library back in like 1841, I think, or 1831. And interestingly, George, this Catholic priest, this Jesuit Francis Matthews, used a Masonic lodge as the first. He bought a Masonic lodge to put the public library in, which I thought was because because supposedly the Jesuits like were at war with the Masons, right? Supposedly, like and like the Catholic Church is supposedly at war with Masonry. Just interesting stuff. I'll pull up that. I'll get that book here right now. Okay. Oh, it's William Francis Matthews. I apologize. William Matthews. Where's my camera here? Turn camera on. Oh, okay. Here I am. You see me, George?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to show you the photo here. So this is the book here. William Matthews, Priest and Citizen. But look what he's doing.
Oh, he has a hidden hand.
That's the hidden hand. So you're telling me like the Jesuits and the Catholic priests, like they're controlling Masonry. Like I wrote a blog post on it. The motto of the 32nd degree of Scottish Rite Masonry is Ad Morgium Al Gloriam, the motto of the Jesuit order. I will see if I can pull up the source from this, or the quote from this book about the Masonic Lodge. Let me see if I can just find that really quick. Okay, Masonic Lodge 29. Okay, so when the Capitol was being constructed, James Hoban Sr., the Catholic contractor, had subordinated theology to business exegesis by joining a Masonic lodge. That's interesting. So that wasn't the quote I'm looking for, but so that's on a different page. There's 3 quotes I'm looking for. I don't know if you heard that name, George. So James Hoban Sr. was the Catholic contractor, the contractor who was contracted to build the Capitol. Accordingly, he had subordinated theology to business exegesis by joining a Masonic lodge and becoming its master to attract Washington the best stone layers of Europe. And Pierre Charles Enfant was another Roman Catholic Freemason who played a part in the architecture of Washington. I just want to, give me a second here. It was just a good quote about the Mason. Okay, it's 45 and 141. Okay, so here's the quote with the library though. Okay, so I'll just read a little bit up in the book, George, to get some context. I'll turn my camera off here. Just give me a second. Okay, but it says, from the moment of his undertaking the presidency, Father Matthews strove to obtain for the institution a building of its own. That's talking about the Washington Library. He had even considered the possibility of erecting another structure to be used as a museum supplementing the library. Refused by Congress to request to establish a lottery for realizing at least the former of these designs, he prudently determined to trim his ambitions to get what he could. In the spring of 1827, he delighted the lovers of paradox by closing an ambitious business deal with the Masons. Their lodge building on 11th Street was purchased by the library with a special provision allowing the former owners to continue holding their meetings in the upper story. So that was the quote I was looking for there, which is very interesting stuff, I think, to say the least, to show there's a relationship between the Jesuits and high-level Freemasonry. Like the average Freemason doesn't know this. They're kept in like a compartmentalized state of ignorance on the reality of their organization. But this just makes sense, because Manly P. Hall, Manly P. Hall admitted in his book, I have it on my channel, it's Masonic Orders of Fraternity. He admits that the Jesuits wrote the Scottish Rite degrees. Or at least he admits that there's a degree that was written by the Jesuits. There's better sources on that than Manly P. Hall. But in Manly P. Hall's book, Lectures on Ancient Philosophy, on the chapter on Freemasonry, he said that Freemasonry is a secret society within a secret society. And he said that like this society within the secret society is something called the Society of the Unknown Philosophers. And he said that the Jesuit Anastasius Kircher was a member of the Society of the Unknown Philosophers. And the Jesuit Nicholas Backstrom was a member of the Society of Unknown Philosophers. So it's just interesting stuff, with Masonry. I don't know if you saw that photo of William Matthews, George, the one I just showed you.
Well,
what's your take on that?
Well, it's funny. Something officially until the 1980s, it was a mortal sin in the Catholic Church to be a Freemason. Although there have been a whole boatload of Catholic Freemasons, probably almost as many Catholic Freemasons as, say, non-Catholic. Babe Ruth, Bill Murray, Napoleon Bonaparte, Jorge Bergoglio, as we discussed earlier, allegedly Eugenio Cardinal Pius XII, and probably a whole bunch of other popes. And it's just
Well,
like,
actually, no. You can see a photo of I think it's Adolfo Nicholas or Hans Clovenbach, but like the Jesuit black generals doing a Masonic handshake.
uh,
You
well,
can, you can see that in
there's
a few photos.
there's a YouTube video from last 10 years, 8, 10 years ago, from the late Christopher Lee, who is wearing a fez. And it says, "Hi, I'm Christopher Lee, and this is given to me by my dear friend of Vincent Price before his death." And Price was a convert to the Catholic Church. So I presume not only were Lee but Price were both Masons. And this is something people have a hard time understanding when it comes to dealing with the Catholic Church. You have the open but false policy and the secret and true policy. And that applies to almost any subject: Freemasonry, abortion,
Well, actually, well, I think especially
homosexuality.
with the Catholics, I think many are confused on Freemasonry because there's so many shills like E. Michael Jones, who I think has to be a Jesuit. But Michael Jones, like guys like him, are putting out all this crap saying that Freemasonry is like a Jewish concoction, and like there's
Well,
all this stuff about like Mussolini's Jesuit confessor Taci Venturi. The source for this is David Kurtzer, the Pope and Mussolini. It's on my archive.org page. Like the Mussolini's Jesuit confessor was literally pushing Jewish Masonic conspiracy theories on him for like 15 years.
well, I mean, in all fairness, I mean, I'm not an apologist for E. Michael Jones, but there are have been a number of Jewish Freemasons.
Like there have been, but like it's the gaslighting about it. Like it's like the complete silence, and it's his rhetoric about how like the Freemasonry is at war with the Catholic Church with Judaism. Many there's tons like the shill. There's a channel Schism 206 that he did a series called like the Occult Catholic Jesuits, where it was just anti-Semitism. Just like what was the book by Anthony Panay, The Plot Against the Church, that classic neo-Nazi Bible that was written in 1967. He was just reading talking points out of that. But like this guy Schism did like 20 videos about like the supposed Jewish Masonic plot to destroy the Catholic Church, for instance. Like there's tons and tons. Like I think that's the propaganda line that people are confused by, and it can be shills because like the clear evidence is that Freemasonry is controlled by Jesuitism, and that's the smokescreen that they're so like the Jews controlling Freemasonry is like a smokescreen. I guess that's the best way to describe it.
Well, I just would like to clarify something. In addition to the doctrine of open but false policy and the secret of true, there is another concept of a couple other concepts of purging off the dead branches and eating your own children. I'm talking figuratively. Yes, the Catholic Church, generally
Well,
speaking,
George, just
in
really
his
quickly,
tradition.
with the eating the children, that's the title of Johnny's book. But I was in Switzerland recently, just meeting some family out there, and in Bern, actually, I was able to go outside 23 Hengrass, which was the Alan Dulles' office during World War II, where he was meeting with Heinrich Himmler, for instance, and many high-level Nazis in Vatican and Soviet officials. But there was a statue in Bern, literally in the city street, George, of this guy eating a kid. literally he's eating a kid. Like that's the statue, and it's just like in the street. People, thousands of people walk past it like every single day. I just thought it was super weird. And there was another just super weird statue. Now that I bring that up, there was a statue in Bern, Switzerland, of like a dog sniffing this guy's balls. That's the best way I could describe it. Just, I don't know what the Catholic Swiss aristocrats have too much time on their hands, but I just wanted
Okay, what I'm talking about is purging off the dead branches and eating children. I'm not talking about as Johnny would use it. I'm saying that, well, as I said before, in order to, oftentimes the Catholic Church has said, you know what, the church or the leadership in a certain country has become too liberal. That they're not, they're not killing non-Catholics or heretics. Therefore, we need to give them some motivation. So the Catholic Church has no qualms with killing their own, whether they're deemed to be too liberal or they're being
George,
completely.
I have a quote in this, in the Peter J. Doiswick book I was reading here. Give me a sec. Where was that? He has a quote where he quotes an author saying, a Catholic author from the 20th century who teaches that it's okay to kill heretics. I just want to pull up the quote here. And St. Thomas Aquinas, famously taught that it's okay to murder heretics in his Summa Theologica.
Well, okay,
Which
but
definitely that's one of the Summa Theologica is definitely like one of the Bibles of like the Catholic morality. St. Thomas, has been like deified in the Catholic Church. I just want to pull up that one quote here. Keep going. Keep going on your point, George. I'm going to pull this up while you're going.
okay. So in order to create this, maintain this whole psyop that the Masons are out to destroy the Catholic Church. No, they're not. They're simply a proxy of the Catholic Church. They may use them to kill other Catholics who are, say, too liberal or who may be completely faithful to church, but they need them to do something, such as they need Irish Catholics in Ireland to move from there to the New World. So they'll manufacture potato famine. So they'll kill hundreds of thousands of Catholics who are otherwise faithful in order to get others to move to places like America or Australia, or they'll kill Catholics in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, in all throughout Latin America, because the leadership is too soft.
Well, absolutely. Well, even in Franco, like I know some Catholic priests were even killed because like they were disobedient to Franco, the devout Catholic Franco, and the Vatican said anyone who's disobedient to Franco like will be punished as a heretic, even like if you're like a lower level priest.
Well,
I have the quote here, George. This guy was a Dominican, and the Dominicans were like the Jesuits before the Jesuits. You could say they were like the bloodthirsty murderers of the Inquisition. But this Dominican cardinal here, Alexis H.M. Lepicier, Lepicier, he died in 1936, but this is the 20th century. He was a professor at the Roman University de Propaganda Fide. He has written 25 works on dogmatics and has an article on, quote, "The churches have the right to condemn heretics to death," end quote. That's the title of the article. But the priest, the quote, pious Father Alexis Lepicier writes, quote, "It is a wholesome and praiseworthy thing to put a person to death for the good of the community. Perhaps this doctrine will seem too drastic for this age. When one considers what harm it does to society, one will understand that if traitors or murderers are justly condemned to die, those who publicly undermine the Catholic faith deserve more rightfully to be put to death. As proof of our argument, we have the 24th condemned proposition of the syllabus of Pope Pius IX." We're good. Okay, so that's the priest says. So the priest to validate his the idea that the Catholic Church can murder heretics. Pope Pius IX in the Syllabus of Errors said the church has not the right to resort to force. So that was condemned in error. But you see, that was the 20th century that the Catholic Church said it's okay to murder heretics, and for the good of the community, like the Catholics who were living in Ireland at that time, it was the good of the community to kill them off, and so that they could be or to starve them out, so they would be forced to go to America. This doctrine can be adapted to cases where they're killing their own flock, as well as the non-Catholic heretics. I'll link this book in the description. This was Peter J. Doiswick's book, Roman Customs and Practices, written in 1964. And he quotes in this book, like bulls, like the bull Extirpita Prada from 1535. That was a famous papal bull where the inquisitors, the property of the heretics was like 1/3 was to be given to the church, 1/3 to the civil authorities, and 1/3 was given to the person who snitched out the heretic.
Well,
and essentially, like that's another whole topic in itself, because like the system of policing in Nazi Germany was like a community style of policing, where like the majority of the arrests in Nazi Germany were people ratting out their own citizens, like turning them in, and that's a Inquisition model. That's what the Inquisition did. They got people to rat out their own, fellow citizens, and brothers and sisters out on the streets. By putting this fear of God, like fear of saying if you disobey against the church, you're serving Satan. But like community policing is on the rise in the U.S. You have witches, like Jesuit witches like Janet Napolitano, saying, "Oh, you need to be on guard for terrorist activity. Call your authorities if you see anything suspicious." Like that originates from the Roman Catholic Inquisition.
Well, you're talking about what the civil authorities are doing, such as the police or the Office of Homeland Security. However, something we've discussed before is a concept that's correlated to that is social media. They're clamping down on voices of dissent. As I said before, even if you question the official U.S. immigration policy, for instance, that's not condemning it. Just saying, hey, wait a second, is this the best path for a country? You're automatically shut down. Saying they'll say, well, you're a hate monger, you're a bigot, you're racist.
Well, they'll call you a terrorist even. Like the Department of Homeland Security has like the audacity to label peaceful protesters now as terrorists. For instance, all dissenters will be known as like political terrorists. I'm pretty sure now if you question 9/11, you're labeled as a terrorist. The Department of Homeland Security, because it is Homeland Security. Look into it. It's a Jesuit. It's the most Jesuit-controlled agency in the U.S. government.
Well, I mean that's just an example. Well, or they'll just simply gaslight you, saying you're a conspiracy theorist, and what they like to do. This is especially bad here in America. Is an either-or option. You're either a Democrat or you're a Republican. Either you're pro-Trump or you're talking about the last election. Either you're pro-Trump or you're pro-Hillary, or you're pro-conservative. You're either conservative or a liberal. And there's no nuance. There's no continuum, and you basically are sucked into one extreme or the other. And people have said to me, when I did not vote for Donald Trump, they would say, "Oh, did you want Hillary to win?" Well, no, but that's a different subject altogether. And so you basically, in order to have a conversation with anybody in this country, you had to be pigeonholed. And when you say that you question the official 9/11 story, oh, are you one of those crazy conspiracy theorists? You wear, a tinfoil hat, and do you believe in Bigfoot, and things. They'll do everything
Well, think about it,
possible.
George. All the Roman Catholic late night comedians, like Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, uh, Mulvaney on the set, like all of them. Well, I know John Oliver's done this quite a bit, but like all the late night comedians, the Catholic dominated uh, late night comedy bracket, they ridicule conspiracy theorists all the time. And you're like, and like, they do like, and like they'll take their controlled agents like Alex Jones, and they'll put a clip of Alex Jones, like when he, for example, when he went on Roman Catholic Piers Morgan's show on CNN and acted like a complete buffoon and turned into like a tomato, was screaming his lungs out, making like the resistance to gun control like look like crazy like lunatics, for instance. But like they took Jones like looking like making an ass out of himself and like took that like blew it up. Like I remember that incident. All the comedians like started ripping on Alex Jones, making fun of him, saying, "Hey, look at," and then like, they associate that with like the average conspiracy, quote unquote, conspiracy theorist, and they go, "Oh, look at conspiracy theorists. They're so crazy. Like they're maniacs. Like." And like they just laugh and like ridicule people who believe in the official narrative. But I just know late night comedians do that quite a bit. And millions of people watch those guys, like millions. It boggles my mind, but they have a huge audience.
Well, so that's the job of being a controlled opposition agent. You're supposed to have release some of the truth, and actually even quite a bit of truth. But you somehow have, and this is something Johnny has mentioned before.
Oh,
You have
no,
to.
Noam Chomsky, great example of that. Like Noam Chomsky denies the Cambodian genocide, and that was done by Roman Catholic Pol Pot. Massacred millions of people. Is another example of a modern day Inquisition. But Chomsky will say that the Cambodian genocide didn't happen. That was the U.S. that caused that. And even when you look into like the U.S. bombing of Cambodia, it was Jesuit trained Knight of Malta Alexander Haig who was behind the U.S. bombing of Cambodia, for instance. And Chomsky never ever goes to the Jesuits. And whenever he talks about I remember him talking about the Nicaragua or the Contra wars in the 1980s, like, oh, the U.S. government was declaring war on the Catholic Church, the Holy Catholic Church. Like, it's ridiculous. And Chomsky did an interview, I know, in Commonwealth magazine, the Catholic Commonwealth magazine, where Chomsky said that like he actually names two Jesuits that he looked up to as role models. And Chomsky, I forget the name. There was a famous incident in the 70s where Chomsky was endorsing a Holocaust denier, neo-Nazi publisher in France, for instance. And Chomsky, like this is on his Wikipedia. Like when Chomsky was defending the CIA, like there was a CIA director who came to work at MIT, and Chomsky was like, "Oh, the CIA, this guy was a great guy at the CIA." He's complete controlled opposition, and Chomsky, I think, actually puts out like anti-American hatred. I think that's part of like he's part of like the Jesuits trying to he's part of the agenda with the war on terror is to create hatred for the United States, in the Middle East and all over the world, to further polarize that, the war on terror. But Chomsky, I think, puts out a lot of like blatant anti-America propaganda. He doesn't talk about how the U.S. is a proxy of the Vatican. He never talks about the Jesuits ever. Like I've yet to see Noam Chomsky talk about the Jesuits.
Well, it's funny you should mention Noam Chomsky. I remember seeing a video of James Corbett a few years ago, and yes, he's almost certainly controlled opposition himself, and he may very well be a Jesuit. However, he's a notch or two below Eric John Phelps. Corbett actually
Oh,
puts
just
out
really
some
quickly on
pretty.
Chomsky, it wouldn't surprise me if the Jesuits, spoon fed him all of his linguistics crap. I haven't read his linguistics stuff. The Jesuits
Oh,
are like the masters of linguistics, and Chomsky was able to get on the Jesuit trained Knight of Malta skull and bonesman William Buckley show.
ah,
You don't get onto that show without connections.
oh, okay. So, but speaking of James Corbett, he did a video a few years ago on Chomsky, and I did not watch it, but it said, "Is Noam Chomsky a gatekeeper?" And the answer would be, yes, of course. And he's probably going to cover, I imagine in the corporate video, he'd cover a number of the same points you do. But if you, I'm sure you've seen a number of the corporate videos. And as I said, he actually has some decent material. However, like Anthony Sutton, he'll talk about secret societies like Skull and Bones or the Freemasons or the Bill or the Council of Foreign Relations, but he never mentions the Vatican or the Jesuits or anything along those lines. So Corbett has a similar approach. So, however,
Yeah, like he's a disinformation by omission agent, but he's just a level deeper than Chomsky in like the disinfo. Like he's been disclosed to give a bit more information. For instance, like Noam Chomsky like kind of like verifies the official story on 9/11 and says that like the Federal Reserve Bank is great. Like we don't need to change it. Like what are you talking about? For instance, but James Corbett I think is just like a level deeper with the disinformation by omission. Because for instance, like I mentioned, like Chomsky like verifies the official story on 9/11, just like Edward Snowden, for instance. Edward Snowden reached out to a delayed Jesuit lawyer, Plato Chacharis, Georgetown lawyer, who is the lawyer for Opus Dei, Robert Hansen, who was giving USA military secrets to the Soviets for 25 years, for instance. But that I just want and I've seen parts of Corbett's video on Chomsky. I haven't seen the whole thing, but that's part of what Corbett was hitting Chomsky on. Chomsky kind of propping up the official line on 9/11. But but Corbett obviously didn't go to the Jesuit level either. I think he is a Jesuit gatekeeper from what I've seen on Corbett. Like for instance, like on his video on Allen Dulles, there was, I think, obviously there's no mention of Avery Dulles in the Dulles family whatsoever.
I actually, that was probably one of the first things that tipped me off about Corbett when it was watching the Dulles video. I said, that was a glaring oversight. He didn't talk about Avery. I guess he didn't have enough time. But if the video was a little bit longer, he would have got to him.
It was a fairly long video, though. I want to say it was like 48 minutes. So, like, if he prioritized getting that information in about Avery Dulles, it would have been in the 48-minute video, surely.
Yes, and of course, one of the things he forgot to mention about the Dulles brothers is that they're both Knights of Malta. He mentioned they're Freemasons. He mentioned they're I believe Allen was Skull and Bones, if I'm not mistaken. But they did mention the fact that they're a Papal Knights of Malta. Allen's nephew, John's son, was Avery, the future Avery Cardinal Dulles, S.J.
Yeah, he was the Vatican, and he was like the Vatican's representative at the World Council of Churches. He was given like 100 honorary degrees. I want to say, like Teddy Hesburgh, he was given like a stupid amount of honorary degrees.
Well, in my opinion, an honorary degree is probably just as valuable as a real one because it's a recognition. One, you get the recognition without the work.
Well, I agree. Like, it ultimately doesn't mean anything, but obviously, the Jesuit and Catholic schools honored him, but there was just a mountain of secular universities that were honoring Avery Dulles. Like, what are you doing honoring a Jesuit? You're a secular school. Let alone a Jesuit that's connected to two. Like Allen Dulles was directly involved in bringing thousands of Nazis, to the United States of America. Allen in particular, all of them, but Allen was the one in particular with Paperclip and Operation Sunrise that was, really deep in the Jesuit intrigue. Like Allen Dulles met with the Jesuit Heinrich Himmler in Switzerland, in CIA documentation. Like I have it on my archive.org page. And I'm sure Corbett has seen that document. It was declassified in 2007 in the Nazi War Crime Disclosure Act. So I'm sure Corbett is aware that Dulles was meeting with Heinrich Himmler, who modeled his SS off the Jesuits. Like G. Gordon Liddy even admits it in his autobiography. The most establishment of establishment source. G. Gordon Liddy. Literally page 36 of the book Will. You'll see it. So, but yeah, just yeah, Corbett, I'm sure he's aware of this information with Dulles and Himmler being, Jesuit pawns, and they were meeting together in Switzerland. He talked about the Nazis a little bit in the video, but he didn't go, in depth with the Nazis.
Well,
So yeah, I think it's safe to say with both Corbett and Chomsky are Vatican disinfo agents who give disinformation by omission agents.
well, I mentioned her before, and I mentioned this series that I went to at my alma mater, Sonoma State University of Roanoke Park, California. Since 1983, 84, in the spring, they have something called the Genocide Project. And I mentioned I went to several of the lectures this year. And I decided to do a search on the professor, Diane Parnas, um, who's in charge of the political science department of our school. And she's the one who hosts this facility. She's the one who actually invites the guests to come speak or show video or something like that. Well, I came across a video actually of her from 2015, 4 years ago, where she actually was the speaker. And she decided to, I believe I sent you the link on this. She was giving a tutorial of the rise of Nazi Germany from the end of World War One to World War II. So you're talking about a 20-year period, 1918 to 1939. And I watched the whole video, and it was informative. I actually found a couple of things I didn't know, like the names of certain parties and things like that. However, she herself made a few glaring omissions. There was no mention of Edmund A. Walsh, no mention of Franz von Papen. There was no mention of the fact that, as you said earlier, that Himmler, Goebbels were all Catholics and trained by the Jesuits. Hitler himself was trained by the Jesuits. Anything like that. And as I've said to you before, Diane Parnas got her PhD at Georgetown. As a matter of fact, she went to the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Services. That is where she got the doctorate. So she had access to all this information. Now, she speaks German, she speaks Russian.
Oh, she has access to the Georgetown archives, like at the Georgetown University archives. That's where the James J. Mooney papers are. The GM executive who was knighted by Hitler, and like he was touring Nazi Germany with the Knight of Malta, Joseph Kennedy. And that's all in those papers. I just know that because Charles Hyham writes about them a bit in his book, The Trading with the Enemy. But being connected to Georgetown, the Jesuits do have the biggest library system in the world. So like she knows. I'm saying, to your point, she knows the true nature of the Catholic, the Catholic nature of the Third Reich, and all the fascist regimes at that time.
And of course, now as I say, the video that she did dealt with the 1920s and 30s for the most part. So she didn't deal with post-World War II Germany and the subsequent Nuremberg trials. However, I'm sure if she did, she would have whitewashed that as well. There would have been no omission, or there would have been no mention of Edmund Walsh. He's almost like a ghost. It's as if he didn't exist. And
well, I know recently there was a book. I think there was I haven't read this. There was a biography that was written on Edmund Walsh by Fordham University Press that was put out in 2007 or 2008. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure it's a watered down biography, but I bet there's still some revealing information in that book. I'm gonna try to get my hands on it, but just stuff. I bet there's small details about his affair, like his activities at Nuremberg and stuff like that. And he was at the Versailles Treaty too, if I'm not mistaken. Alan Dulles was at the Versailles Treaty as well.
Okay, so well, speaking of the Versailles Treaty, I wasn't going to mention it tonight, but I mentioned this in the show before. There are a number of components of the Versailles Treaty, but one of which was the creation of a whole bunch of new countries, something like 10. Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, the Baltic countries. Almost all of the countries that came into existence at the Treaty of Versailles would end up becoming Warsaw Pact countries in the 1950s. They would end up being under the Iron Curtain. And and I don't think that was a coincidence because Walsh knew, well, he knew several things. I think it was the Jesuits' plan to have the First World War to be a stalemate with the purposes of, well, they had several aims. One, to kill as many people as possible, and two, to make sure that Russia left the war so she could have her own revolution and the Jesuit could impose communism on the Russian people through their proxies, Stalin and Lenin. Speaking of which, something I was discussing with Johnny recently is how many of their puppets have fallen out of favor for whatever reason, and they decided to kill them. We've talked about JFK before, but what about those who allegedly died of natural causes, like FDR, like J. Edgar Hoover, like Stalin? And their deaths may not have been natural. And is it because they outlived their usefulness? They weren't.
Well, I know a lot of people think William Harding something fishy about his death.
Oh, Harding. Well, okay. Warren G. Harding. He was the president after Wilson. He was in the 19.
Did he die in San Francisco?
I had to go look that up, or I believe that was McKinley. But apparently, Harding died in the early 1920s. He didn't serve his first full term. And I guess the problem with him is even though he's about as corrupt of a president as you could possibly be, he did not want the United States to join the League of Nations. Also, Wilson did not want the United States to join the League of Nations. You could also, this is something I heard from Eric John Phelps. So take it for what it is. The problem with McKinley is, that was 1901. Well, initially, McKinley did not want the United States to go to war with Spain, but I guess he, begrudgingly decided to accept that. But I'm sure he fell out of favor with him for some other reason. With FDR, he was the only president to serve more than 2 terms. He served 12 years. He was elected to a 4th term, but he died just like a few months into his last term. So maybe.
I don't know. With FDR though, I think he was so loyal to them. Like you can see a photo of FDR at Fordham University.
Yes.
In I think 1940, and he's with Father Robert Ignatius Gannon, who was Cardinal Spellman's. Interesting, like he was the president of Fordham. Father Gannon was Spellman's like superior, and and this is in the FBI and the Catholic Church. If you go to Johnny Cirucci's archive.org account, he's like OCR'd scanned this book into like a single page viewer. But the FBI and the Catholic Church by Steve Rossum. What was I saying here? So I lost my thought there with the. Sorry, it's getting late here, George.
Yes, I need to call it a night. So do you want to pick this up Friday morning about 10 o'clock Eastern?
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, and I know you mentioned Johnny wanted to join in the show with us.
Well, I invited him because it is called the Cirucci Team Brief, and I'm sure he has plenty of material to share with us. And it's just like, I like having him on. It's just like, I like that feistiness. And just to mention something in conclusion, the I can't remember politics being this crazy in America. I mean, politics have almost always been corrupt in America or any other country, but it seems to be particularly weird. It's almost like a blood sport, and you have if you listen to our media here in the country, whether you talk about left wing or right wing, it's just like they keep dragging out this whole Russian collusion thing and
Oh,
obstruction.
absolutely. And just just really quick, it is a blood sport. Like in the media, like Andrew Breitbart was killed. I know there's you guys have done you guys on previous shows. You guys have covered this, but Breitbart had a he was Jewish, but he had a Breitbart News. People, it's a fairly household name, pretty big conservative website. But he died like 3 weeks after calling out John Podesta for being a possible pedophile during the Pizzagate revelations. John Podesta is a professor at Georgetown, Jesuit Georgetown University. Had like his Tony Podesta, his brother, also went to Georgetown. Like the Podesta Group is one of the most powerful Wall Street law firms. But this lady here, Louis Mensch, was muddying the waters just after Breitbart's death. Because what's interesting with Breitbart, he was replaced by Jesuit-trained Steve Bannon at Georgetown, who Steve Bannon said that joining Goldman Sachs was just like joining the Jesuits. He said that in a French documentary that's on the internet. Type in Steve Bannon Jesuits, and Pope Benedict said Goldman Sachs was doing God's work, but Steve Bannon took over Breitbart, Jesuit trained, and he said, "Oh, there's nothing suspicious about Breitbart's death." But this Catholic I found here, Louis Mensch, he's a conservative member of the British Parliament, like a prominent blogger. But Louise Mensch said that she had like smoking gun proof, and she's Catholic. If you look on her Wikipedia page, she's Catholic schooled. This Louise Mensch said she had smoking gun proof that Breitbart was killed by the Russians.
Ah,
So I think with to hide that I think it was a Jesuit job from start to finish. That's why Steve Bannon, Jesuit trained Steve Bannon, took over Breitbart News. But this Roman Catholic Louis Mensch was muddying the waters. Just I mentioned that because I think it's just a classic example of Jesuitism in the news, trying to confuse the masses. And like a bunch of mainstream publications picked up on that story that Breitbart was supposedly killed by Russia, which just
ah.
doesn't make any sense.
Well, I I had to be going. Yeah, I think you mentioned that before we went on the air. So, something I wanted to mention. Speaking of this whole Russian collusion, nonsense, and when you call it Russian collusion nonsense or hoax, admittedly, people will say, "Oh yes, you're a Trump tard. You support Donald Trump." No, I mean, a hoax is a hoax. It transcends a party or political affiliation or philosophy. Um, Now, the special prosecutor in the case is Robert Mueller, and how two of his assistants are Rod Rosenstein, I forgot his exact position, or Rod Rosenstein and Andrew Weissman, uh, Weissman being the German pronunciation. And turns out that Rosenstein, he's obviously Jewish, but his wife, Lisa Buzarian, she went to law school at Georgetown, and Weissman has been a lecturer at Fordham. So, and of course, if you start talking about the connections, they're almost endless. So, some of the big attack dogs against Trump have been Nancy Pelosi. She's the Speaker of the House. She's Italian Roman Catholic. One of her daughters went to Loyola Marymount. Another one went to Georgetown. Her husband, Paul Pelosi, is on the board of directors at Georgetown. And so And of course, we've talked about the Trump family, one of his children.
Oh, supposedly John Brennan, supposedly the Jesuit trained John Brennan, John Jones Strake Brennan, I guess John O. Brennan. I guess because there's two Jesuit train or two plugged in John Brennans. There's John O. Brennan of the CIA and John J. Brennan, the Notre Dame chairman of the Notre Dame board of trustees, who's a board of director at Rockefeller Capital Management. But supposedly John O. Brennan, the CIA director, supposedly Trump waived his security clearance, and he's now like a Trump critic, which is hilarious because they both went to Fordham. But just Jesuit theater. John Brennan versus Trump stuff is like pure Jesuit theater.
And of course,
and this a great example of there's been many Fordham Jesuit theater news stories. I remember this actress Lana Del Rey. I guess she's a prominent singer, but she has a metaphysics degree, Lana Del Rey from Fordham University, and supposedly that she and a bunch of witches were casting spells on Donald Trump like a year and a half ago. It was just to gaslight people with a bunch of nonsense, fill their minds with crap and garbage. Mindless stories. But the Jesuit, psyops, go deep in the media.
Okay, I do have to be going, so I probably had to call this a night by 2:30 Eastern.
Sounds good.
Okay, couple quick points. We started the show talking about the recent shooting false flag in Virginia Beach. But something I did not mention on the show regarding that is, generally speaking, these attacks, whether you're talking about Virginia Beach, the various shootings that have taken place in Texas, they're usually in or near major military installations. Virginia Beach is very much of a Navy town. It's like the San Diego of the East Coast. You've had shootings in or near like Fort Hood, Texas, Waco. You had a doctor had a doctor shot a bunch of patients back in 2009 at Fort Hood, and there seems to be a connection between proximity to military installations and these attacks. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think definitely. Well, J. Edgar Hoover, interestingly, in 1950, I put this declassified. It's on my archive page, but I put this in the preface for the Dollar in the Vatican. But J. Edgar Hoover, he had a plan to imprison 12,000 Americans permanently in military institutions back in the 50s. For instance. A lot of these false flags, they are strategically located by military institutions. An interesting trend. We've covered. I have a video of this on my channel. People, I recommend go watch. And I remember when I lost my thought earlier with the book, The FBI and the Catholic Church. I mentioned it with the Jesuit father Robert Ignatius Gannon of Fordham, who we mentioned. There's a photo of him with Franklin Roosevelt. And when Harry Truman got his honorary degree from Fordham in 1946, you can see a video of it on YouTube. Harry Truman walked up to the podium with Robert Ignatius Gannon. But Robert Gannon said the FBI and Fordham University have the same ideas. That's on page 42 of the book. Very revealing stuff, to say the least. Where we're going here with the police. I had an article up here. What were you going on just now, George?
Well, we're talking about how these false flags will usually take place.
Oh, with military. Oh, okay. I got it. So, what I wanted to mention Walmart, because I've done a video on the Jesuit connections to Walmart. For instance, Stuart Walton, a descendant from the Walton family, on their on the board of directors and one of the CEO or CFO. But Walmart, a lot of military bases, Walmart has been closing a lot of stores in the United States unexplainably. And it's been proven that many of these closing Walmarts are actually turning into military bases. and like FEMA camps in certain cases. Like this is in the congressional record. Like the Roman Catholic Dick Cheney, who affiliated with Halliburton. Cheney was affiliated with Halliburton while he was vice president. He was still getting paychecks from Halliburton, but Halliburton actually got a government contract to build FEMA camps in the United States in 2006, for instance.
Ah,
And like the U.S. military is like police departments are military forces at this point. Like they're defending all of the corporate property that the oligarchs have amassed. Like the United States is a corporation. The Jesuits incorporated America in 1871 with the Organic Act and gave Georgetown special tax exempt status within the United States. The Jesuits incorporated the USA with the Organic Act after they murdered Abraham Lincoln in that Roman Catholic coup d'état. And Ulysses Grant, coincidentally, the president who signed off on this Organic Act, which turned Washington D.C. into a corporation, was made an honorary member of the Jesuit Philodemic Society. And Ulysses Grant, went on to meet the Pope afterward. But and in terms of corporation, the idea of like like the Catholic Church is the oldest corporation in the planet. So they're and like like the this current legal system we're in is basically like a Roman caste system, which originated in the Roman Empire when you with like with your birth certificate and like the whole the legal personhood, the legal identity. That's all Roman law, like the current legal system, and that's part of the Matrix movie. I didn't cover that I covered this in my video, Jesuit Art of Dissimulation. But like there's a legal word called insinuare, literally called insinuare, INSINUARE, and it's a word that means to be the drafting or a legal deposit or the placement of a name into a legal deposit. That's what insinuare means, and the word matrix means the drafting of a legal document. So in terms of like this, that was part of the allegory of the Matrix. Also was showing like the machine, like once you're drafted with the birth certificate, like you're in like the artificial sea of commerce, or bound to your legal person. But then that's all Roman civil law.
well,
For instance,
okay.
and you see the power. Like I know Johnny covered this on a previous show. Like the Supreme Court in Louisiana ruled that Roman Catholic priests in confessional, they don't have to disclose information in the confessional to the civil courts. For instance. So
Okay.
that shows you that like they're above, like the civil system completely. It's a caste system.
Well, just in conclusion, in ancient Rome, they had two types of spirituality. And I know this may be hard for people to grasp. They had religio and they had a superstitio, religion and superstition. Superstition didn't mean the same thing back then as it does now. There's basically a legal religion and an illegal religion. Valid spirituality versus invalid spirituality. You So if you were a religio or religion, you were registered with the Roman government. You were basically on their books. Didn't matter what you believed, what you worshipped, or whom you worshipped. You could have been a Christian, you could have been a Jew, you could have been a Zoroastrian, just so long as you were registered with the states and you recognized the leadership of the Roman government. You worship, the Roman Caesar.
That's very much like how Emperor Akbar's regime worked. The Mongol leader in the 1500s, who had he was extremely close to the Jesuits, to say the least. You can see photos of Jesuits at his court. And he gave the Jesuits gold bars, for instance. And Akbar had this book was written by a Jesuit. This was so crazy. I did a video on this. There was just this crazy like MK Ultra type experiment that was done by Emperor Akbar and his minions. The Jesuits were at his court at this time of his incident. But they took like hundreds of kids and just locked them up in a room and completely isolated them for years, taught them no language, nothing. And they just said that like these kids were just like dumb zombies that like couldn't function at all. Like it was like an experiment. Pardon my language here. It was an experiment to see how retarded Emperor Akbar could make these like certain subjects. But like that's very Jesuitical. The Jesuits are masters of mind control. That's what they were doing in the Paraguayan Reduction. But I'm mentioning Akbar because his whole regime was he modeled his regime on a syncretic empire. Like you said, you let people be Zoroastrians, you let people be Brahmins, you let people be Muslims, you let people be Christians. It was like a very syncretic, like ecumenical type of society that Emperor Akbar kind of portrayed, or that was like in the kingdom. It was very evenly displayed, like the different faiths. That's what the Jesuits, you see with Vatican II. Like Vatican II was written by Jesuits Karl Rahmer and John Courtney Murray. So the Jesuits are all about everyone coming together, and the whole ecumenism is Jesuit from its inception.
Well, it gets scarier. I mentioned this to you before, but in the United States, you have something called 501c3, and you have something similar to it in Canada. I don't know what the designation is, but you're if you're a church, you don't have to do this. This is purely voluntary. But if you do, you get a tax break, and so it doesn't matter what your affiliation is. Whether you're Catholic or some type of Protestant. Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, whatever. If you're if you're a 501c3, you register with the federal government. You get your congregation gets a tax code, and I know this because I've talked to people who are treasurers at churches, and so your church, regardless of your affiliation, is now a corporation, and you have corporate officers. The leader, usually the pastor, has they have a few different designations. They have the CEO, the chief executive officer. They have a secretary, sergeant at arms, and a couple other positions. And you're obligated to have meetings at least once a year and fill out a budget and things like that. And you send a copy of this to the Internal Revenue Service. And all your parishioners get a tax break. They can write off, whether they donate to the church on their taxes in the spring. However, there's a catch. You cannot engage, as your pastor, you cannot talk about anything overtly political. You cannot say, well, you should vote for this candidate, not that one. You should vote yes on such and such proposition or measure, or no. You cannot say anything overtly political. You cannot talk about a court decision. So you're muzzled as to what you can. You can talk about various topics like abortion or homosexuality in a generic sense, but you cannot say that yes, it is wrong for the federal government to legalize same-sex marriage or a state government or whatever, because you're at risk of losing your tax exempt status. So in other words, preach what you will about the Bible. Doesn't matter what your affiliation is, what type of doctrine you have. The government, i.e., the Vatican, is essentially running your church, and most people are totally oblivious to this.
Oh, absolutely. Well, people are completely oblivious to the Vatican's influence in politics in general. Like people think the Pope is just like an old guy who just wears like a robe, who all of the rulers of the earth just go to his palace and bow down to him and they kiss his foot just for like the heck of it. It's just for show. He's just an old guy who for some reason has some influence, but he's just like a harmless this old guy in a robe. That's what average people think. They're just disconnected. They know nothing about the Vatican. The Vatican is the most ancient state department in the world. And that's why in American Protestant churches, there's absolutely no discussion on the Romanization of the United States. And part of it too, the Protestant, like the apostate Protestant denominations, have benefited incredibly off this system, and that's why like the Seventh-day Adventist Church has huge financial assets, for instance. Like the Methodist Church has large assets. The Baptist Church has large financial assets. So that's why like they're ultimately hushing up about this because they're enjoying the riches as well with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church gets a bigger piece of the pie, a much bigger piece of the pie. But I think
And
that's why they're
this
also
is something I
quiet.
probably,
Like they're getting rich, fabulously rich, in the process.
and this is
But
something
ultimately, like
most people
there's an agenda though. Ultimately, like, it's the Vatican. It's a way like this 501c3 program is the pacification program. It's a brilliant way to pacify the churches, to cripple them financially if they don't if they aren't obedient. That's ultimately the best way to control someone in this modern society is to cut the funds.
well, exactly. And most churches, as I said, regardless of affiliation, they're just mostly concerned about meeting budget. Can they pay the mortgage? Can they pay the staff? Can they pay the pastor's salary? And
Oh,
yeah,
and just quickly,
they might
they lie though, George. Just I did this is a while ago. I did a little write up on the Boston Archdiocese. I went through their comprehensive annual financial report, which discloses like the church's investments. The budget report that the church has released that doesn't disclose the investments that the church has. So the Archdiocese said, "Oh, we're running like a $20 million deficit here," but that was just a baloney to say the least. I found that in their report they had like $650 million in it. That's on the Rome Rules subreddit. People type in Boston Archdiocese comprehensive annual financial report. I just wanted to mention that. But like
okay.
they do have like like they're a corporation. Like it says in the report that like the Archdiocese of Boston is a corporation soul. Like they're telling you right, like the church is the oldest corporate body in existence. They got different departments, just like the corporation. They got like different presidents of different departments, just like corporations.
Well, and then something that most people don't understand here in America, and I imagine it's similar in Canada, is your 501c3. So that basically hampers what the pastor can say behind the pulpit, politically. Also, people are totally oblivious to the fact that in their community, in their diocese, well, if you're a Protestant church, you're not part of a diocese. You have all these secret organizations, the Freemasons, the Knights of Columbus, who are working behind the scenes to pass ordinances, to get people in the city council, the county board of supervisors, who are serving the Roman agenda, who are getting them to become police chiefs and sheriffs to help implement Roman law, Roman Catholic canon law.
Absolutely. That's
And
why the
people,
police state is coming out of control in the United States. And one of the Department of Homeland Security is like the main institution that's giving just it's up to billions now. There's been billions of dollars of military equipment given to police officers, like MRAP vehicles, tanks, um, everything you can think of going to police departments. I mean,
this is
I saw footage of Baton Rouge where the cops were wearing full body armor and like full visor helmets with AR-15s in the street. Actually, I'll link this. The ACLU did a report in 2014. There was a police chief in Arkansas. I forget this guy's name. I got to see if this guy's Catholic, but his name's in the report. But this Arkansas police chief in 2015 literally said he made an announcement saying that our police officers will be patrolling the street with AR-15s and we will be stopping every citizen we come across. And he says that we're going to do this because like the criminal, like we're going to, because he said something like, because the criminals don't like to be talking to, something like that. So he's implying that like all citizens are criminals, just like Rome does, with all, citizens are heretics. Like America, it is frightening. I think how the U.S. is turning into a police state. Like, there's no oversight with this. There's literally billions of dollars of military equipment. Like the U.S. spends $750 billion on the military. Take that in. But all this police high it's war equipment is going into police departments. There was a story in Arkansas in West Virginia where the police threw a flashbang into a baby's crib and blew a hole in the side of her head. For instance, like it's out of control. SWAT teams throw flashbangs in on like elderly women. They'll smash into like old doors where there's women and children present. Every department basically has a SWAT team now. Like the Department of Energy has SWAT teams. Like SWAT team, and that's another thing of this ACLU report. I know you covered. Maybe you can bring this up. You found a Roman Catholic connection to the SWAT who went, but I know it originated in LA in the '60s, but since 1980, almost every single local police department will have a SWAT team now. For instance, and actually there was a U.S. Marine who was killed by a SWAT team. I think his name was Jose Garanez. That's I'll link the ACLU report, but there was even a former U.S. Marine that was killed in his own house by a SWAT team. So and then the founding fathers, there was Jesuit influence in the founding of America, but some of the founding fathers did warn about not to have a standing army in place, and that's what the Roman police has become. Actually, I'll pull this quote up here, George. This was crazy. This was a quote from the Jesuit Malcolm Wilson, who was Nelson Rockefeller's handler. He was his lieutenant governor who coached him into politics, and who drove Jesuit trained Malcolm Wilson drove Nelson Rockefeller around in his car while he was campaigning early on to hide how rich Rockefeller was, for instance. But I found Malcolm Wilson made a quote about the police. Let me find that here. Because he basically said that police are where is that? Give me a second. So the devout. This guy, I think, Governor Malcolm Wilson, I think, was actually a lay Jesuit. He went to the Jesuit retreat house all the time. He was a member of the Fordham Board of Trustees on the Fordham Financial Committee, for instance. But this is what the Malcolm Wilson said about police officers. He said, "You are all that stands between civilization and chaos in the city of New York." End quote. I repeat, Malcolm Wilson said to the cops, "You are all that stands between civilization and chaos." So that's his advocating a police state, as much as they can. Donald Trump, the Jimmy Dore show. Jimmy Dore is a controlled opposition channel, but he got disinfo by omission. But Jimmy Dore does occasionally give good information. He did a show where Donald Trump was speaking at a police rally, and Donald Trump, Jesuit trained Trump, as Johnny would say. But Donald Trump was literally like a fascist rally straight out of Nazi Germany. Donald Trump was saying to the cops, "Yeah, when you're a cop, when you're putting someone into the back of the car, yeah, get rough with them. You throw them around a bit." And all the cops were like, "Yeah, yeah," and they started cheering and stuff like that. When Trump was literally telling them to rough around American citizens.
Well,
it was crazy. It was literally a scene out of Nazi Germany in 1933. All the Roman Catholic cops behind them with their Roman wreaths right on their visors, like, "Yeah, let's go beat the shit out of some heretic citizens." Yeah, just like the Inquisition did. I'll put that video of the Jimmy Dore covering that because I just don't know. I think this was in 2018. Trump gave this speech to the police association, but it was just fascism at its finest. Even communists that every single fascist and communist regime has turned into a police state. It's universal. Every single one, every single year in America, I want to say 900 to 1,000 Americans are killed by American police every single year. You're more likely to be killed by American policemen than an Al Qaeda or ISIS terrorist. You're infinitely more likely to be killed by an American policeman than Al Qaeda in the United States. I'm not bashing on the police, but it's the police culture. The police are supposed to protect the civilians. And part of the Romanization and the militarization of the police is a warrior mentality where the citizen is now viewed as the enemy, and the police is just there to protect the current status quo, the wealth of the private corporations, and to keep the current religious system in place ultimately. Yeah, I linked the video for Trump I'm saying Trump literally advocates for the cops to beat the shit out of people. Donald Jesuit trained Trump. Literally, Donald Trump has the article on the what was it, National Catholic or the Catholic Register, the article Trump's Catholic Warriors. He's literally stacked his whole military. All of his military advisors are Roman Catholic, all of them. Mattis is Roman Catholic, Dunford is Roman Catholic. Down the list. Keith Kellogg, Mike Pence's national security advisor, Jesuit trained, Roman Catholic. Dunford is Jesuit trained. John F. Kelly, his chief of staff, Trump is Jesuit trained. His department of head of the immigration department, Lee Cisna, Jesuit trained at Georgetown. But and then with New York, like does Peter Doiswick talk about this? Like in New York City, like Charles Coughlin. Well, like this is in the book Undercover by John Roy Carlson. Charles Coughlin was telling his Christian Frontier terrorists that they had police protection in New York. He said, "Yeah, when the police pull you over, to say you're with Charlie, to say you're with Coughlin, and you'll be fine."
Well, okay. If I could, okay. Last thing. Now we talk about Friday, the shooting in Virginia Beach. And perhaps I can elaborate on this on Friday. But the alleged shooter, Chaddock was his name, or I had to go look. He was in the Army National Guard. So you're talking about a probable case of sheep dipping, and as I said, I'll elaborate on that on Friday. However, something that probably got missed in the public discussion is in the nearby town of Santa Rosa, California. Santa Rosa is about, maybe 10 miles or 16 kilometers north of where I live. There's a there was an aborted false flag. Somebody, I guess a student came on campus who was some type of handgun. I don't recall what type it was. So they decided to shut the school down, and the cops rolled in with full body armor, camouflage, things like that. They had helicopters, they had an MRAP. It was like a scene out of a Hollywood movie. And now, I don't know why this kid.
That's literally that's a war zone. Like when they show up like that,
Yes.
that was part of the Jesuit Boston bombing psyop. It was a martial law drill, because the police were given the legal right to smash in doors of every citizen in Boston, just to go into, and just fuck the First Amendment. Like who needs a warrant? Like martial, and they actually did temporarily declare martial law.
So
what event? What year was this event? And where they SWAT teamed these people? What college was this at?
this was actually in Santa Rosa, California, last Friday. It was at Santa Rosa High School. Apparently, a kid walked on campus with a handgun, not an automatic. So they shut the school down and they sent in the local police and the FBI, and they're in full body armor. You can actually see videos of this online and pictures. And the school was closed for hours. Nobody was shot. So they said, you know what? It's better, safe than sorry. So we decided to uh, have a massive presence on campus. And so I guess, they arrested the kid and the alleged gunman. But as I said, he did not fire. And this is going to be, and I guess I could say, well, because we have this massive response, nothing happened. So that people, a lot of people will probably say, well, thank God, they did this because we averted another Sandy Hook or Parkland type situation.
I'd say, yeah, but like in reality, you're just being subjected to Nazi-style police state like drills and measures. Like even like in my apartment 2 years ago, George, like there was some guy had like a BB gun in my apartment complex, and this girl thought it was like a real gun, so she called the cops saying, "Oh, there's a gun at this apartment," and like I just looked out my window and I see like 5 cops like fully in armor with like looked like AR-15 or M16 assault rifles like sprinting across the lawn. I was just like, what the f, like, what the heck's going on? Like there's the like, they overreact, and the overreaction is crazy. Like, and that's why I linked the ACLU report, and it goes into a lot of like SWAT team documented cases of SWAT teams overreacting in America. Like that case where they literally threw a flashbang grenade at a baby. They threw a flashbang into a house and it landed right into a baby's crib. For instance.
Well,
So
I
there's been many cases of just insane overreacting by the police in America, and the case in San Diego, but the Jewish, resurrecting like the Christian Front, Jewish terrorism back, anti-Jewish terrorism back in the 40s, like the San Diego Police Department, where the recent anti-Jewish synagogue shooting happened, had the San Diego Police Department literally has a Roman wreath on their seal. Like, how more obvious could you get? Like, people look up San Diego Police Department, Romans, like, look up the seal of the San Diego City Police Department. Or San Diego County seals. The county of San Diego has literally Roman fasci right in the center. And the chief of police went to Jesuit Seattle University, or the San Diego County Sheriff Bill Gore. For instance.
Well, okay.
So,
Just on the little bit,
so like with papists in charge of the police, and when you see Roman fasci on the county, uh, literally the county emblems, like, don't expect the anti-Jewish terrorism to stop anytime soon.
okay, and this is my last point. But speaking of local stuff, this lockdown happened at Santa Rosa High School last Friday. Well, the mayor of Santa Rosa, Tom Svedheim, he got his undergrad degree from St. Mary's College. And I've mentioned this to you before. The district attorney for Sonoma County, Jill Radovich, got her law degree from the University of San Francisco. Now, granted, this is a different jurisdiction, and I just read this the other day. The the chief of police for Petaluma, which is just south of me, Ken Servino, he also got his undergrad degree from St. Mary's College. So, the mayor of Santa Rosa, who went to Catholic school. You have the chief of police, the second largest town in the county, went to Catholic school. You have the district attorney who went to law school at the University of San Francisco. So basically, Rome is controlled of almost all the major choke points of this county.
Oh, absolutely. I just, from my research of going through the alumni of Santa Clara University, like, they control many, many counties through just the Santa Clara and University of San Francisco alumni, especially with judges and
Yes.
district attorneys. Like, it's overwhelming how many judges in California come from Jesuit Santa Clara. It's crazy.
Well, now I live in Kentucky, but the adjacent town, Runnet Park. I mentioned this before. Runnet Park has a population of about 40,000 people and is incorporated in 1962. So it's a fairly new community. One of the co-founders was Morris Fredericks. He just died last year. He went to Business DePaul High School in Petaluma, and he got his law degree from the University of Santa Clara. So you could say, for all intents and purposes, the Jesuits founded this town.
Well, it sounds like. Well, do you know the history? Like, was your area a Spanish territory?
Yes, yes, it was part. It was part of. It belonged to Spain. Then it belonged to Mexico. Then it belonged to the Republic of California.
Well, Spain, like, well, you could say like Spain and Mexico were fiefdoms of Rome. So you could say the area was actually like this thing, Rome, or the Vatican would view it as their property if Spain and Mexico had the land.
Yes.
A big, when Pope Alexander the Sixth, he drafted the bull Inter Carrera and signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, which gave all of the land from both poles, from the Arctic to the Antarctic pole, the entire North American and South American continent, he gave to Portugal and Brazil in 1492, for instance, in the Treaty of Tordesillas.
Well,
So
for what it's worth,
Spain was in that treaty. So Spain, Spain, the Spanish Inquisition. Spain has been a Catholic colony for forever. Really, they had that brief history where the Moors, or that brief span where the Moors were running things, but that was relatively short. Like Spain's been a Catholic fortress for forever.
well, and if you just go by the place names in California, most of them have Spanish names like San Diego, San Jose, so forth. But in most of your seats, which is basically the county version of a capital, have Spanish names. So, for example, as I just mentioned a moment ago, I live in Sonoma County. The seat is Santa Rosa, St. Rose. So that goes all the way back to where this area was under Spanish control. And so I guess the Vatican has basically said, you know what? We used to own this place, this whole, California and the Western U.S. officially, and we're just simply just taking back what rightfully belongs to us.
Well, so they made AP Giannini became like the Jesuits banker out on the West Coast with Bank of America. According to Der Spiegel, Der Spiegel literally says AP Giannini became a straw man for the Jesuits. They usually use the word straw man. So that according to Der Spiegel is like an authoritative German magazine.
Well, I mean,
That makes me think that Giannini was like a puppet of the Jesuits, and he was made a Knight of Malta, but like that through Giannini, the Jesuits were able to get because his line of credit, all like the as Nelson Rockefeller would say, all the peasants of California became like dependent on the Giannini credit line, and he like gave everyone the loans in San Francisco in particular after the earthquake there, and
in
1903. 1903.
1906. Well, for what it's worth, so as I said, most of your major urban centers have Spanish names, and they're usually named after a saint in the Catholic Church. Well, the capital of California is Sacramento, which literally means the sacrament. So,
Oh, there you go, right there.
so
Yeah, it's right in the names. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, wow, Sacramento, this Catholic sacrament. Wow,
so
big red pill.
they're
Wow.
based,
Well, like the
no,
biggest
so,
one's probably like the District of Columbia. It's in between Virginia and Maryland, like Virginia, Maryland.
oh,
That's wow, George, and that I never picked that up with Sacramento just till you put it like that. Oh, that's crazy. Like I say, the best way to hide it is hide something is hide it in plain sight.
well, yes,
Just like my girlfriend I told my girlfriend this. She was kind of mind blown. I'm like, hey, like, that all that when you see like the cardinal, like, well, like the bird cardinal and like all the sports teams, you see cardinals. Like it's named after Catholic priests. Like Catholic priests were named as cardinals for centuries and still are. And like they wore red robes, just like how the bird, is red. And it's kind of like a light bulb. It's like, oh, okay, I see it. Like you don't think about it like that, and you don't see it until you think hard about it, I guess, because it's right in plain sight. Like they mask like this Catholic innuendo, like these Catholic doctrine into like modern society, because our society has been like literally Jesuitized. Um, like the Hollywood Motion Picture Code was written by a Jesuit, Daniel A. Lord. Um, going back bigger, like the calendar, like the Gregorian calendar was written by a Jesuit, Christopher Clavius. A Catholic priest drafted. Well, I guess I don't think he was a Jesuit. But George Lemaitre, the Big Bang Theory, which has become like a pillar. Like the Big Bang Theory is everywhere in our modern world. If you don't realize, like that comes from a Catholic priest. They're behind almost everything. Like, who was the Catholic priest who was a pioneer in genetics? I know you brought
Mendel,
Mendel.
Gregor Mendel. Now he was not a Jesuit. He was a Dominican, I believe, or one of those. So they basically gave us our modern sciences, and so almost everything you learn in a science textbook
came from a Catholic and usually Jesuits. And it's this
Actually,
especially
I
true.
found a like I don't have. Let me see if I can pull up the name. Just one of the guys who co-founded the neutrino. Let me find. Let me pull up this up here. So I found one of the guys who supposedly detected the neutrino. Um, and I necessarily don't think I have to. I don't think the sun is like a ball of hydrogen. I think it's more of like an electric type sun. So I kind of have the BS meter on neutrinos because it kind of they're used to push like their infinite like Newtonian paradigm. But one of the let me see, one of the co-founders of the neutrino though was a Knight of Columbus, or one of the quote discoverers of it. I just want to find out the scientist's name. Clyde Cohen. This is his name here. Yeah, Clyde Cohen. He was a Knight of Columbus. I found this source on one of those like info sites. And yeah, he joined the faculty of the Catholic University of America, and he held a post there for his entire life. Yeah, and he worked for the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, which had Knight of Malta, Knight of Saint Gregory the Great, Knight of Saint Sylvester, John McCone as its commissioner from 1958 to 1961. He also worked at the but this Clyde Cohen was a Knight of Columbus, and he supposedly discovered the neutrino. It's this interesting connection with the Catholicism to science. It's and you wouldn't think about it, but like they're you have to give them credit. Like the you have to respect your enemy. That's there's a verse in the Bible I think about that. The Jesuits are very smart, and you have to think about how much free time they have to study. Like throughout the centuries, their order is enormously rich. Like Jesuits don't have to work 40 hours a week at like a slave job to make ends meet. The order takes care of them financially. So they have the amount of time they have to study is just like you can't really comprehend it. That's why you see certain Jesuits like know 15 languages, for instance, or like know 20 languages. Because they have all this free time. Peter J. Doiswick mentions that a bit, just how Jesuits have tons of free time, more free time than the average person. But, with free time, like you're able, they are smart. Like the way they're have all the puppets on, like the way they control the banking system, the political system, the religious system. They're very very smart. I'd be the first one to tell you that the Jesuits are smarter than I am. Like for instance, I'm humble about my level of intelligence. I'm not trying to like prop up the Jesuits or anything. I'm saying they're very intelligent people. I think they're very evil people, but they're very intelligent nonetheless. That's why you see that's why you see their influence and like everywhere. Like in the Saturday Evening Post article in 1958, I think said the Jesuits have like 28 seismological centers all over the United States that are monitoring the Earth's ionosphere, for instance.
Well, there's a
They have
quote.
incredible assets. Like think about they have that observatory out in where Mount Graham, Arizona. They have that massive telescope. We don't see any photos from that massive. It's one of the biggest telescopes in the world, owned by the Jesuits or by the Vatican. And we get no photos.
Okay.
Like no photos. We don't know what type of research they're doing. But I'm saying I guess the point is they're very intelligent, and that's why they're the fact that's the reason they've deceived so many people into the Jewish conspiracy because they very intelligently weaved all that propaganda out there, and like the propagandists are very good at pointing to because I guess that part of they very brilliantly prop up court Jews who are subservient to them, that there's enough of them out there where if you put the strings together, it makes it look like there's a possible conspiracy, but it's all baloney at the end of the day.
Okay, last point, and I do have to be going. Is after 3:00 Eastern. There years ago, I was watching a Catholic program on EWTN through YouTube, and there's like a Catholic apologist, Ray Gurundi, who was talking to a Catholic priest, a Jesuit, uh, Mitch Pakwa, and they're having a discussion about languages. And Gurundi was asking Pakwa, well, Father, how many languages do you speak? Oh, at least a dozen or so. Really? And he said, and Garando is basically saying, I could barely speak English. I'm impressed. I mean, how is it that you've been able to do that? Is it, well, it takes years and discipline. I've never been married. I've never had a family. So I have a little bit of extra free time. And so, yeah, Jesuits are notorious for their education, for being bright and learning things and knowing about a lot of different disciplines, and one of which being language. And if you're going to conquer the world, you need to know how to communicate with people. And if you're going to manipulate others, you need to be able to communicate with them in their own language. And that's why figures like Walsh, Edmund Walsh in the past, they've been able to go to like the Treaty of Versailles, the Nuremberg trials, and so forth, and to uh, influence treaties and
Evan Walsh was
governments.
an advisor to the Nazi Catholic geostrategist, Dr. Karl Haushofer, for instance. He was his like role model. Or...
Yes, and so you need to be able to know about a bunch of different things, not just languages. You need to know about geography, about politics, economics, political science. You need to have working
But
knowledge.
like the part of it, like think about how big the Jesuit libraries are. Think about the Vatican library. Like Helena, this was Helena Blavatsky. She estimated there was like over 100,000 volumes in the Vatican. This was in like 1877 of like kind of like more occult, esoteric type literature. For instance, but think about through the Jesuit confessions, all the documents they have in their chest of all the secrets of all the different thrones of the world that they've been amassing for centuries. That's the confessional was like the blueprint to like their master espionage system. By getting all the inner secrets of the nobles and the kings, you're able to get the inner workings of all of these foreign lands. And I personally think that a Jesuit will have to, if a Jesuit is being deployed, let's say to let's say a random country like Morocco, a Jesuit will have to study like the history, like the economic history of Morocco, like the social history of Morocco, like the religious history of Morocco. Like they prep their agents before they send them in to different countries. They're international. Like there's Jesuits, all over the world. They have one of the biggest refugee services in the world, and the Jesuit Refugee Service is one of the biggest agencies, that's Romanizing the United States. And I just want to mention another big Jesuit scientist I didn't mention was Teilhard de Chardin, S.J. He's big into. Well, I guess some scientists he's been discredited by I think some more honest scientists for his the Jesuits' role in the Piltdown Man hoax, like that archaeological fraud. I think it was in the 60s where they supposedly found the missing link.
Well, yes,
The Jesuit was interestingly a Jesuit popped up in that scandal. But I know the Chardin. I've read parts of his book, The Phenomena of Man. It's kind of looked more like pseudoscience to me. He posits there's this like new sphere that like emanates everything. It's essentially it's like Platonic philosophy, really. But like in terms of science, like he was very prominent. Like he was getting, speaking at science conferences, getting endorsements, writing articles in science magazines, secular science magazines. And he was also like one of the fathers of the New Age movement. Like the Executive Intelligence Review, actually, there's a great article. It's on my. I'll link this in the description. It's called "The Jesuit Role in Third World Affairs," and they said if you hear someone like spouting like planetary consciousness and we need to come together like, united as one, he said you're probably listening to like a stooge of Father Teilhard de Chardin, S.J.
well, Yeah, I mentioned one ex-Beatle, George Harrison, at the beginning of the show. Well, that reminds me of another Beatle, John Lennon, his song "Imagine." Just one of the lyrics is, imagine, no religion, no heaven, no hell, no heaven above, no hell below. Just imagine all the people, living as one. And so that sounds reminds me of what you're talking about.
Well, ultimately, like like the word Catholic itself, I think is universal, like or monotheistic. So and they're all about like, oh, we're the one true church. The Catholic Church is very monotheistic, in its structure.
Ah, well,
I'm saying, do you
well,
want to? Do you got to get going soon, George?
well, I had to be going like about now, and
Oh,
I
it sounds
guess
like, yeah, it's getting late here. Okay, so yeah,
so.
that was a good, solid show tonight.
Okay, so hopefully Friday morning at 10 o'clock or so Eastern, we can pick this up. And there are a few other points I didn't make, and I hope to do so on Friday.
Oh, sounds good. No, there's yeah, I have some stuff I'm gonna go into on Friday as well. I think I'm
So,
gonna. I think I sent Johnny the story, but I think I'm gonna talk about a bit about the Hugh Drum, prominent U.S. General from the first two world wars. He ended up working for the Empire State Building, Empire Empire State Co., which had two Knights of Columbus and Knights of Malta. Uh, John J. Raskin and Alfred E. Smith built the or funded the Empire State Building. But Hugh A. Drum, there was a huge ceremony in 1937 for Father Damien, like known as like the Apostle of Hawaii. But he was a Belgian, but Father like this Jesuit trained general used U.S. taxpayers to fund the trip. They used U.S. military bombers to transport the body of this Catholic priest all around the world, and eventually to Belgium from Hawaii. Which is interesting that this Jesuit trained general thought it was wise to use U.S. taxpayer dollars to transfer the remains of this charlatan Catholic priest, Father Damien, in Hawaii. And this Jesuit trained general he had a Jesuit priest, Walter Drum S.J., as his brother. But Hugh Drum, the U.S. general who went to Boston College, Hugh Aloysius Drum, he was interestingly the head of the U.S. Army in Hawaii from like 1935 to 1937, which kind of predates Pearl Harbor. And I think that's a key strategic post for the Jesuits to have one of their military guys out there at that time. And you mentioned David Walsh's role as the head of the Senate Naval Committee in enacting Pearl Harbor. And I have a source, Dr. James J. Murphy, said that David I. Walsh was a lay Jesuit. And David I. Walsh, I'll bring this up on the show. Like he had a big Nazi scandal in the 40s where the Jesuit trained David I. Walsh was said to have aided a Nazi spy ring, and the case was just dismissed, obviously, because
well,
he was a Jesuit. Like I think he was a Jesuit because I remember when you were describing his role in creating Pearl Harbor, it was just very powerful. Like he literally allowed it to happen. Being on the head of the Naval Committee. And David Walsh, he was connected to this Nazi called Olive Tetziau, who I saw was just this like openly blatant like Aryan Nazi who was preaching we need to create like a white kingdom of Nazis in America. And he was friends with David I. Walsh. John Ray Carlson has that information in his book Undercover. But if you could really quickly, George, just briefly go over that David I. Walsh summary, if you could. I know you do gotta get going, but
well, boy, I'm not online right now. It's just like Walsh. I believe I'm just going from memory. He was from Massachusetts. He was governor.
Yeah,
Well, he was the first Catholic governor and the first Catholic senator from that state. He went to, I believe, Holy Cross for his undergrad, and he had a bunch of honor degrees, Boston College. He never married, and there's allegations that he was a homosexual, which is not too surprising. And I say, and it's uncanny how similar he was to Hoover. Now, Hoover was ostensibly a Protestant. He grew up Lutheran, and he attended a Presbyterian church as an adult for most of his life. But as I said, there's a good chance Walsh could have been a lay Jesuit. And that's another conversation altogether. So, how many other figures have there been?
Well, I think Louis Buttons, I think, was a lay Jesuit at that time. Louis Buttons was a devout Roman Catholic who then became like a high-powered communist in the American Communist Party, who then reconverted back to Catholicism, and then like preached like the Cardinal Spellman anti-Catholic McCarthy Jesuit witch hunt after that. But interestingly, Lou Buttons, after he like left the Communist Party, became a professor at Jesuit Fordham. And like I mentioned, like when James J. Murphy mentioned that David I. Walsh was a lay Jesuit, he mentioned Lou Buttons in the same batch. Like I think he mentioned Louis Buttons was a lay Jesuit. Fulton Sheen, he said, was a lay Jesuit. David I. Walsh, he said, was a lay Jesuit. Francis X. Woodlock, this Wall Street financier. And there was a William Walsh, this Catholic author, he said was also a lay Jesuit. So like a couple Walshes. I wonder if David I. Walsh was probably, I don't know if he was related to Edmund Walsh, but like they behaved the same. That's for sure. And I remember you just saying that like he was responsible for some like a lack of oversight on the part of the Navy, which is like made it easier for Japan to eventually strike.
Well, what Walsh did, along with another senator, Carl Vinson, is he moved the Pacific Fleet from San Diego to Hawaii. They did that just like the year before the attack. And they massively increased the size of the Navy's budget. So they went on a huge spending spree because they just knew until the United States was going to be involved with the war. And, that's awfully convenient. It's just like, you generally speaking don't spend money on the military unless you're in a war or you anticipate one. But speaking of something I'm anticipating is falling asleep, and I'm probably going to do that in the next 5 minutes. So I guess we pick this up.
We'll call it great show tonight, George. We'll call it one there, and I'll see you later in the week.
Okay, well, take care, and I'm probably just going to set the sign off right now.
Oh, sounds good. And thanks for everyone for tuning in, and hope everyone has a good night. All the best, everyone.
Okay, thank you.